Good morning, everyone. I call the Standing Committee of Public Accounts meeting to order. My name is Laura Lee Nickel. I am the chair. Nice to see some familiar faces. I'll remind everyone to have their cell phones on silent so that not to disrupt the meeting. And I'll ask for committee members to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Good morning, Danielle Barkos, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North.
Good morning, Johnny McDonald, MLA for Hants East.
Good morning, welcome. Melissa Sheehy-Bouchard, I'm the MLA for Hants West.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lachance, the MLA for Halifax, Sable Island.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Braden Clark, MLA for Bedford South.
Yeah, hi, Nolan Young, MLA Shelburne.
Thank you, and I'll also acknowledge that we have officials from the Auditor General's office here today, including the Auditor General herself. And I would ask for, we also have the Legislative Council and the Legislative Committee's office present, and I'll ask the member to my left to introduce himself.
Gordon Hebb, Counsel to the Committee.
And to my right?
Kim Langell, Committee Clerk.
Thank you. On today's agenda, as you know, we have officials with us from the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development, Nova Scotia Teachers Union, and Public School Administrators Association of Nova Scotia with respect to the report of the Auditor General, Preventing and Addressing Violence in Nova Scotia Public Schools. And I'll ask the witnesses to introduce themselves, beginning with the witness to my left.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Scott Armstrong. I'm the chair of the Board of Directors of the Public School Association of Nova Scotia.
Hello, I'm Annie Baert. I'm the Executive Director of Student Services and Equity with the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Good morning, everyone. Elwin, LeRoux, Deputy Minister, Education and Early Childhood Development.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Gallagher. I'm the Regional Executive Director for the HRCE.
Bon matin tout le monde. My name is Michel, Collette. I'm the Superintendent for the CSAP.
Good morning, Ryan Lutes. I'm the President of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. And I will start with Deputy LeRoux to speak first with his opening remarks, and we'll go to Mr. Lutes and Dr. Armstrong in that order. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin by thanking the Office of the Auditor General for their work on this important issue, and I want to thank our teachers and school staff for their commitment to students and student outcomes. I echo what Minister Drouin recently said. It's been helpful to see that the recommendations from the Office align very closely with the priority Safe and Inclusive Schools work underway in Nova Scotia. This alignment helps confirm that together with partners from the NSTU, PSANS, regional centres, and the CSAP, we're moving in the right direction. Moving in the right direction is a good thing, but what is even better is moving in the right direction at the right speed, and we accept that things need to move faster. We share a commitment to improving our data collection, supporting students through the development of a behavior strategy, and updating our provincial school code of conduct policy and emergency management plans. We have seen from our data and heard from teachers, administrators, support staff, and communities that our tools need to be updated, programs strengthened, resources and supports made current. Last fall, the Minister announced to our entire system that this work was underway, and we've been working with partners to do this work together, ensuring participation, understanding, support, and impact. There is progress, but we understand the urgency of this work. Minister Drouin has now directed staff to accelerate timelines, including the update to the Provincial School Code of Conduct policy. We are now committed to having the updated policy ready for review by our school communities early in the coming school year. Consultations with SACs made up of students, parents, teachers, and community members on our school code of conduct policy are already underway. In the meantime, there are 3 actionable items we're pulling out and focusing on from the larger process already. We will work closely with our partners, but we want to be clear today that we're hopeful that we can see some meaningful progress on the following items effective September. The new Teachers Provincial Agreement provides for significant new investments in supports. We're open to making sure these investments are directed by those people on the front lines. For example, we've allocated resources for school counselors, but if schools decide that a social worker may be more appropriate, we're open to those alternatives and any other teacher-led initiatives that improve quality of life for students or staff. On best use of educational assistance, our EAs are incredibly important. We want to have frank discussions about the best use of EAs in our system, including staffing levels and expanded responsibilities as appropriate. On disciplinary action, including suspensions, we understand the sensitivity around suspensions, but the time is now for this discussion. When student behavior is so disruptive to others that they could lose the privilege of physically attending school, action does need to be taken. It's time to be clear, decisive, and serious about this in our provincial policies and direction. We are serious about taking action. It's also been incredibly valuable working with the NSTU and PSANS to lead this work. Thanks to an NSTU recommendation from our Safe and Inclusive Leadership Table, we're now immediately making changes to incident reporting for teachers. I look forward to hearing from everyone here today, especially from our partners representing the NSTU and PSANS. As I've said, our department is committed to taking every possible action as quickly as we can to address and prevent violence in our schools. We all want schools to be places where students thrive and staff feel supported in their work. It has always and will continue to take strong leadership and community commitment to ensure safe learning environments in our schools. Thank you, Chair. We look forward to your questions today.
Thank you, and we'll now go to Mr. Lutes.
Good morning. First off, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today and to speak on behalf of 10,000 Nova Scotia teachers and their specialists. Increasing school violence has become perhaps the single most pressing issue for our teachers. Children only have one chance to be kids. If they aren't provided with safe and healthy learning environments, their development can be profoundly and negatively impacted. Unfortunately, as I believe the Auditor General's report demonstrates, rising school violence is not currently being taken seriously by our education system. In fact, it is often downplayed and minimized. Granted, this is not a simple problem to solve. It's complicated and nuanced, and it affects each grade level differently. But we owe it to our kids and our educators to take urgent action. The Auditor General and her team have done an outstanding job analyzing the problem, and I want to thank her for making it a priority to hear directly from teachers as part of this work. Her recommendations provide a solid foundation we can build on to create safer schools, but we cannot afford to waste any more time. We need a comprehensive plan now. As one teacher put it, students are physically violent on a daily basis. TAs, teachers, and other students are getting physically hurt. There are times in the classroom that I feel students fear for their own safety. It's not fair to not feel safe at school, and as a teacher to feel that you cannot keep your students safe. This is an alarming but a realistic description of the issue. Let's also be clear, there is no other workplace where this would be tolerated. Yet this is the situation our educators and our kids are facing daily. Our students, their families, and our educators deserve much better than continued inaction on addressing school violence. The NSTU looks forward to collaborating on a decisive and urgent plan to addressing and preventing school violence and to make our schools safe for our teachers, educators, and our students. I look forward to your questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lutes. Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you for the opportunity to represent the almost 870 school-based and system-based administrators across Nova Scotia, and we'd like to acknowledge the great work done by the Auditor General in her report. The Public School Administrators Association of Nova Scotia shares concern, though regrettably not surprised regarding the increasing trend of school violence reflected in the Auditor General's report. There is no question as to the negative impact these incidents have on our students, staff, and our communities at large. There is no question as to we are therefore welcome the recommendations of the Auditor General and commend the Department for its commitment to implementing those recommendations on a province-wide basis. As leaders within public schools and school systems, administrators take their responsibility to facilitate a safe learning and work environment very seriously. The development of a province-wide strategy with clear guidance to our members and other staff and sufficient resources allocated to implement the strategy is a recommendation our association strongly endorses. We'd also like to acknowledge that several recommendations contained in the report, such as a review of the Provincial Code of Conduct and a plan for consistent reporting of incidents, have already been initiated by the Department. At the invitation of the Minister, our association and the NSTU have been participating on the Safe and Inclusive Schools Committee, which is supporting the Department as this work progresses. And we welcome the statement by the Deputy this morning that's going to increase the speed at which these are implemented. Given the pivotal role of administrators in facilitating public safety, we recommend and request that PSANS also be a participant in the development of the provincial strategy. In our opinion, this strategy should include, but not be limited to, the following components. 1, professional development for administrators on preventing violence in schools and responding to incidents of violence when they take place. 2, providing adequate administrative full-time equivalency and related resources in schools so that principals and vice principals have the time and resources to implement proactive and reactive measures to prevent, mitigate, address, and document school violence while meeting the various complex duties limited in the Education Act. And 3, an examination of pupil supervision during the school day and a plan to implement an enhanced level of supervision identified by need to ensure the safety of students and staff in all schools, and also an increase on-site mental health support for students so that students with mental health challenges will have the needed services identified and implemented prior to violence taking place. And I look forward to your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. I will now open the floor to committee members to speak. Oh, MLA Lachance, you have a question?
Actually, I have a motion. So I really appreciate being able to hear from NSTU and from PSANS here at the table. We are also joined by many members of QP, who of course are also the other professionals who are in our schools and in our classrooms. And I would like to make a motion that the committee welcome a representative QP to the table to be part of the discussion.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion? No, I'm not seeing any raising of hands. All in favor? Aye. Contrary-minded? Motion is not carried. So as is typical, we, in our public meetings, go 20 minutes for each caucus, and we start with the Liberals and then go to the NDP and then the PC party, starting with MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. So just wanted to say up front, if there's a moment where I cut somebody off when they're giving an answer, I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to get to as many questions as I can over the course of 20 minutes. So just wanted to make that clear. Deputy LeRoux, I wanted to start with a few questions to you. In the report, I think maybe it was the first message actually in the AG's press release and key messages says, and I'll quote, there is an inadequate focus on preventing and addressing violence in schools at EECD. Do you agree with that assessment?
Mr. Deputy Minister LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair. What I can assure the member is we are acting on all of the recommendations offered by the AG in the report. We've agreed with them all, and we've also put in a timeline for actions that we will be taking responsive to them. We haven't gone line by line and agreed or disagreed with every single one of the data points that the AG has offered. Instead, what we see is there is action that needs to be taken, and it needs to be taken urgently, as has been offered. So we are focusing more on how do we respond. Now, given post-pandemic data trends that we can see, we've decided it's really important to create an umbrella strategy under which we will review a provincial school code of conduct. We will tie in emergency management planning, and we recognize we need to actually build a behavior strategy. What we've heard from all of our employees is there are lots of resources, but the coherence among them is not as tight as it needs to be right now. We need more clarity. We need more standards on how we collect and use data at school level, at system level, and of course at regional level. So we agree with all of those recommendations from the AG, and we see that we need to work on them fast. We need to work on them quickly. We need to understand what does the data tell us and make sure that our responses to it are going to create the environment where every student can be successful in school and every staff member goes to school to do their best. When staff can do their best, students do their best. That's what we're doing.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Lutes, perhaps I would just pose the same question to you. You touched on this in your opening statement as well. But as I said, the AG said that there is an inadequate focus on preventing and addressing violence in schools at EECD. That doesn't mean going forward that will be the case, obviously. But in the past and through the report, we saw over the last 6-7 years, 60% increase in violent incidents at schools. So from your perspective and from teachers' perspective, do you agree with that statement that the AG made, that there hasn't been the adequate focus on preventing and addressing violence over the last few years as there should have been?
Mr. Lutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I 100% agree with the Auditor General. And while I believe the people in our system really want to create change, and I believe that the minister, especially, that she believes she wants to make schools safer. What I don't believe has happened, and again, I'm not putting fault because I do want to move forward, but everyone's juggling 1,000 different balls, and I do 100% believe that there's been an inadequate focus, not necessarily for reasons that aren't understandable. But I do think that the human resources in our schools are not there so that we can provide supports to students. And so if we can't provide those supports, I think we want to make schools look good instead of actually be good places. And that's not the fault of the people. I think the people in the system are doing their level best, and that goes for educators, that goes for TAs, that goes for our administrators. But I think there's been a focus on other things. I think there's been a focus sometimes on, again, if we don't have the human resources to make schools safer, well, what can we do? Oh, we can make them look safer by making our reporting, again, not necessarily in a nefarious way, but not maybe making our reporting as easy as it can be, by having some teachers, maybe some school principals, feeling pressure from others to minimize school violence in their schools. So I do believe there's been inadequate focus, and I believe that we're at a crossroads where I'm really hopeful that the department has received the message. I believe they have. And the AG herself said this requires strong leadership, and this requires a change in culture where I believe the number one focus has to be safety in our schools. It has to be decreasing violence, and all of the other things that are also important come after that, because we all know that students are not going to learn, our educators are not going to be their best if they're not feeling safe, and right now they're not feeling safe.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, and I think to touch on something that Deputy LeRoux mentioned in his response, reading the report, talking to teachers, assessing the data, I think one thing that stands out to me is that there is a lack of consistency across the board. So, for example, if you look at incidents as a percentage of enrollment, right, some places are half as much as others. And to me, that doesn't feel right either. It should be fairly consistent across the board, which would reflect similar training, similar experiences, similar approaches, and we don't see that in the data. So I think that's something we should be focused on is consistency across the board, so that whether you're at CSAP or you're Tri-County or HRCE or in Cape Breton, you have the same experience and the same support. Mr. Lutes touched on human resources, which I think is a really important piece of this. Obviously, code of conduct and policy is important too, but if you don't have people in the building who are adequately trained and enough of them, you're not gonna fix the problem. So, Mr. LeRoux, I just wanted to ask you, how do we address that piece of it, the human resources piece, as quickly as possible? As you've said, speed is important here. By this fall, when school starts again, are we going to see more TAs in the classroom? Are we going to see more teachers, classroom teachers, at different levels to make sure that we have enough trained people in place to start to bend the curve in the right direction on this issue?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair. Each year we see more teachers and more support staff in our system given the growth of our system, so that's a fact. But let me tell you how we're acting and what we're doing. And if I could take one moment to just help you understand, we want to make sure that our resources respond to the problem. We want to make sure that what we're doing fixes what we're trying to fix. 86% of students in Nova Scotia have had no behavioral issues recorded or reported in our data management system. It's at least 14% of kids who have. Another 4% of those have had none of the issues identified by the AG as violent. Maybe they have tobacco or cigarettes at school, not permitted. So we're down to 10% of students who've had an incident. 10% is a lot of kids. We need to make sure we understand who they are so that our strategies in response can actually target intervention to correct the problem. Thinking of those 10%, only 4% of them show up more than once. And of that 4%, more than 3/4 are between 3'5" and 4 feet tall, between the ages of 5 and 10. So we need to understand from our data, as we take action, what are we putting in our system to make sure we have impact? So we want to make sure as we are taking action together with NSU, PSANS, and other partners.
Sorry, Deputy MLA Clark wishes to ask a question.
Thank you, Deputy LeRoux. And you just touched on data, which I think is a really important piece of this. So from reading the report, it seems to me that the data is far too broad that we collect right now. So not all incidents of violence are created equal, as we know. Something that a schoolyard squabble of my son who's 7 and his friend is different than someone in high school who might bring a knife in their backpack, for example. So how do we get to a point where we can look at the data and say, okay, our severe incidents, or whatever you want to classify them as, are steady or falling, which would be good, or they're up 20% over the last couple of years, that's a problem. Are we going to be able to have that kind of granularity of data, and when would we have that by?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair. Here's what we're doing about that, because the answer is yes. We are working to have data standards so that we know. The minister in November asked staff, report everything, report better. So we are working to make sure we have a good picture of what's happening in our system. What I would also say is, whether you're in grade 5, 7, like your child, or in grade 12, you should be able to go to school and learn. You should, as a staff person, be able to go to an environment where you can do your work well. So any violence does not belong in our school system. Our responses need to make sure to solve the problems that are created in our system as they are throughout.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, Deputy. And Mr. Lutes, just to touch on the question of human resources again, which I think is really important. One thing that I've heard a lot about from high school teachers in particular is changes that reduce their ability to be in the hallways, to monitor the school, generally speaking. It was mentioned in the AG's report as well, and essentially moving from teaching 6 of 8 classes over a 2-day period to 7 of 8. So one day you have no monitoring time, no prep time, whatever you might have done. So if you could just explain how that's an issue. Is that an issue? If it is, how is it? And how would we address it? Does NSTU know, for example, how many more teachers we need to be in the system to get us back to a 6 of 8 where teachers can actually monitor hallways and diffuse situations before they actually become problems?
Mr. Lutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. No, I think that's a significant issue. And let's first be clear that when staffing was reduced in HRCE high schools, HRCE was the last regional center to be reduced. It was reduced in Cape Breton, I think, maybe 10 years ago. Likely other regional centers, in the number, in the last decade or two. Or some regional centers never had it. But I think what I hear from teachers is that extra flexibility that it gave school administrators to say, hey, Ryan, you're not teaching right now. You're not on your prep time. Can you supervise the cafeteria? We want to start a math extra help room. Can you be the person in there? We want to have an in-school suspension room where we can provide supports to our students that are having behavioral issues, that are struggling, and we want to provide them academic support. Can you go do that duty? And it's not can you, it's you're going to, because of course that's my role as an employee. And so when the HRCE cut staffing levels in high schools, and granted not system-wide, but in high schools, we lost about 10% of teachers, I would say, in those high schools. They were forced to go elsewhere. It took a lot of flexibility away from the school. It took a lot of supervision away from the school. And so I think one thing that people don't often realize is the number of students who are out of class. So in a larger high school, and we have large high schools all throughout the province, from Halifax West to CEC, Horton is a large high school. We can have up to maybe 150 to probably under 200 students who have a free period. So they don't have a class with a classroom teacher to be at. So they are supposed to be at a few different places, but of course it takes humans to get 16 to 18-year-olds to do what they're supposed to be doing. And then that's not to mention if you have, again, a large high school where maybe you have 80 to 100 classrooms, you probably have a few students at a classroom, at a class, whether they're going to the office, the guidance counselor, they're just going to the bathroom. So you have a significant number of students who are out of the classroom for various reasons, and those students are not provided adequate supervision with those changes. They were before and now are not. And I think that's a huge change. And it's not only a change in the data, but it's a change in the culture of our schools. And that's what I hear about a lot is my school doesn't feel the same as it did. I don't get to make connections with students that I don't teach. And I think teachers have an ability to, like you said,
Thank
prevent.
you, Mr. Lutes.
Sorry, thank you.
MLA Clark?
Sorry, Mr. Lutes, I asked too many questions at once. That was my mistake. But the other thing I wanted to get a sense of, if you know, and if you don't, that's fine. But do you have a sense of how many teachers you would need to bring back into the high school system in HRC to restore that culture that you were just talking about?
Mr. Lutes?
Thank you. I mean, I don't have exact numbers. But what I remember was approximately when staffing levels were reduced, that left about 100 teachers in the HRCE. So that to be kind of displaced by those cuts. And so I don't have all the data, but I would think HRCE is around half the population if you look at elsewhere. So we're looking at about 200 teachers, maybe a little bit more with some rural schools. And again, what I hear from teachers, especially in those schools, especially the teachers that taught, that had that extra time to properly support their school and now do not, those 200 teachers is money well spent keeping our kids safe, providing extra supports to our schools, to our kids, to our administrators. I hear actually some from administrators, and I wouldn't want to be an administrator in those schools because you have 3 to 4 people who are running around trying to put out metaphorical fires, but sometimes non-metaphorical fires, who are trying to keep their school safe, and it's a really impossible job for them.
MLA Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Lutes, and Dr. Armstrong. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions here in the 4 minutes or so I have left. There was some issues, I think, that were raised in the AG's report about the interplay between teachers, administrators, parents, and I wanted to touch on a couple of those points. One was that the report noted over 18%, so 26,000 as a raw number, 26,000 of reported violent incidents over the 7-year period that we looked at had no reported action by school administration. I'm just wondering, how do you react to that, and how does that happen, I guess, that almost 1 out of every 5 incidents that's reported has no action? Is that standard or appropriate, or is there something going on there that's an issue?
Dr. Armstrong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd have to question the accuracy of that. I think that came from a survey questions. And sometimes in education, what happens is if a student is not suspended, say there's an incident, people reflect on that as nothing happened. But I would say that our highly educated, well-trained, professional administrators across the province deal with any incident that comes to their office. It may not always result in suspension, depending on what the incident was, as you talked about. 2 7-year-olds getting a tussle on the playground, you might not give them a 5-day suspension. But you're going to do some restorative practices where you work with those students, teach them some conflict resolution skills and others. And that is typically done sometimes at the elementary level by a classroom teacher. At the high school level, it's usually done by a vice principal or a principal. Sometimes you might bring in, if the student has specific challenges, mental health issues, a guidance counselor or some mental health supports. But I would very much like to say that our administrators across the province deal with issues when they come to the office, support those students, support those families, and contact those families of both students if it's an altercation between 2 students when these things happen. Bringing those families in, bringing the communities in as well to support students who have these struggles. So we have highly educated. Most of our administrators across the province have multiple graduate degrees. They make judgment calls every day of how to deal with incidents that take place at the school. But I would argue that our administrators across the province, like I think Susan Casey, the principal of West Bedford, very well-respected administrator in your riding, would obviously deal with any incident that came to her office.
MLA Clark?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Armstrong, in the report, and as you mentioned the survey there, and there were a few thousand responses on that, I believe, one of the takeaways from that was that teachers were saying one of the reasons why they don't report incidents, if they don't, is because the perception is that nothing will happen. No action will be taken. It's a waste of their time, whatever the case might be. How do we get to that point, I guess, where teachers feel like, I'm not even going to bother? And where's the broken part of the chain there that leads to to that kind of decision?
Dr. Armstrong.
Apologize, Madam Chair. I guess I'll respond to that question by just giving a synopsis of what happens when an incident gets reported to the office. Typically, if there's an incident, say it's a tussle between two 7-year-olds or a tussle between two 15-year-olds, those two incidents would be dealt with quite differently by the administration in that office because of the developmental level of the children. Typically what happens is an adult in the school, whether it be a TA, a teacher, or an administrator, will come across an incident or it'll be reported to them by a student. Those students will be referred to the office. At that point, the administrator who takes on that challenge will interview both students and try to determine what happened. If it's still kind of murky because no adult saw it, you might interview some other students that saw the incident. So the first thing you do is determine what happened. Once you do that, you would then look at the code of conduct, and we do have a code of conduct. As part of the Auditor General's report, this code of conduct is to be reviewed. That action's already been taking place by the department. We're involved in that in the Safe and Inclusive Schools Committee, and the deputy said today that review will be done more quickly than we had anticipated, which is good news for our administrators. But you apply the code of conduct. It could be an in-school suspension. It could be an out-of-school suspension. It could be a restorative practice, right? Then you would circle back to the teacher or the person that reported the incident to the office and let them know what happened. And then the parents will be contacted, involving the parents, so they know what incident happened and how it's responded to, right? And then that incident be reported on Power School, which is our data collection, and the action of the office would be recorded on that. So that's typically how things are handled.
Thank
by
you,
administrators'
MLA
office.
Clark, with 26 seconds.
Okay. Sorry, Dr. Armstrong, I just wanted to get this in before time runs out. There was mention that sometimes there were reports of incidents being removed, I guess, from Power School by an administrator. I know I'm putting you on the spot here with 15 seconds probably, but can you explain why that might happen?
Dr. Armstrong, quickly.
As the deputy said, that different regions and the CSAP have different ways to report.
Time is up for the Liberal Caucus Party, and we're going to now go to the NDP for their 20 minutes with MLA Lachance.
Thank you. So, I mean, we're talking about data, and obviously data was a huge issue reported by the Auditor General, and it's sort of hard to know, how to use the information that we have because we know there's gaps, we know that things might be underreported, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to ask a very specific question that might help us dig a little deeper. One of the things that doesn't happen, of course, is the severity of the incident doesn't necessarily show up in how the data is reported. So I'm wondering, with more serious incidents, sort of how are they responded, how are they tracked, so like after the C.P. Allen stabbing, for instance, like what would have been recorded in Power School? I guess I'll start with that question.
Your question is directed to the deputy.
The deputy's ready to
Deputy
respond.
LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, I'll start, and perhaps one of the regional executive directors would appreciate talking a little more specifically. You're interested in what happens at sort of the extreme end of the scale, and that's an important discussion to have. That's why we said we're taking action on that and invite people to be reflecting on suspension. Is that the appropriate way, and is it being used appropriately? Because if a student repeatedly disrupts the learning of someone in school, they might not be able to be there anymore. That exists now. If there's reluctance or reticence or lack of understanding on when and why and where we should use that decision, we need to clarify that. It's really important. Just two things, and then I'll invite Steve if that's okay. Any incident of violence that disrupts learning is a problem, and we have to address all of the problems in order to make sure success.
Thank you, MLA Lachance.
I'm just going to try and focus our question. Of course, we only have a limited amount of time here. So with the CPA incident, for instance, can you speak to what was recorded in Power School? And, we're awaiting, or I think the report is available. It's not been made available publicly. So were there any specific recommendations that have been adopted at the departmental level or at the RCE level from the CPA report?
Deputy LeRoux.
If it's okay, MLA Lachance, Steve Gallagher is probably the best person to answer that question for you this morning.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy. We had a panel review the incident at CP Allen, and they provided a fairly detailed report to us. We received it in October-November timeframe. Our staff has been working on the recommendations since. We've not made the report public because of legal proceedings, and we are very concerned that anything we would share publicly would interfere with that. So our plan is that at the conclusion of legal proceedings, which I think is middle of July, maybe end of July, we'll be sharing the report publicly, as well as a report card, so to speak, on the recommendations in our work to improve based on those. So some of that work parallels nicely with the work that the Auditor General has done, and we've been working on that quietly through the course of this year, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone. And you know, there were some lessons learned from that terrible incident. And I will say, though, important to say that that terrible incident demonstrated how effectively our systems have worked. And in that moment, which arguably was one of the worst, I think, in the history of Nova Scotia, our lockdown procedures worked. Our partners in law enforcement responded remarkably quickly, and we had excellent support in negotiating the specific event and in the aftermath. So some big lessons were learned, and I look forward to being able to share that with families and the general public on the other side of the conclusion of the legal proceedings.
MLA Lachance?
Dr. Armstrong, you were talking about, how whenever a young person presents in the office after a difficulty in school, a violent incident, that there's likely some sort of action that's taken, but maybe not necessarily recorded. So you talked about restorative actions and that sort of thing. And so I guess I have two questions. One is, under the old HRSB, there was a commitment, I believe, school board-wide to restorative justice practices, and there was, quite a bit of expertise built up. And I'm wondering where that lives now. So does the department or HRC have someone leading restorative justice practices in schools? And is there as we make our data better, are we going to start recording more of those sort of, maybe they're more nuanced actions in response to violent incidents? So on the question of restorative justice, I don't know if Mr. LeRoux or Mr. Gallagher want to start.
We will start with the Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair. I will note that PowerSchool is the student database that we use to collect information about kids, so demographic, attendance, achievement, record, historic. It wasn't built as purely a behavioral tool, but within incident tracking, you do choose what follows up afterwards. A range of behaviors are auto-populated for a downloadable sort of menu. It could be a referral to RCH advisor if appropriate, referrals to Schools Plus, as mentioned, in and out of school suspensions. What the minister asked the entire system to do in November was to report more accurately, and from there we will figure out what resources we need to figure out what our data is saying. As you are right, restorative approaches is one of the ways that we remediate behavior and teach kids how to behave differently. Post-pandemic, this is what our data said. All the little kids who didn't socialize are coming to school and causing a lot of incidents, significant in our data. People had to teach them, use your voice, not your hands. And we saw a change in our very early elementary. There are still resources with restorative approaches at Department of Justice. Justice is a partner, supports us in that, and we will look to see when we implement data standards in our new review of School Code of Conduct Policy and Behavior Strategy, what role do restorative approaches play? Do we need to build capacity?
MLA Lachance?
And I want to continue on about the conversation about unassigned instructional time. So the, less available time for supervision in the halls, less available time, for those free periods and trying to get people back to learning or doing what they're supposed to do. And the other thing I've heard a lot about in HRCE as a result of this new policy is really a lack of ability to support extracurriculars. And so again, going back to thinking about the school climate and building a better atmosphere in schools, that's also, I think, a really important part. So Are we looking at reinstating instructional time to its former levels within HRC or more broadly throughout the province?
Is that directed at HRCE, Mr. Gallagher?
Mr. Gallagher or Mr. LeRoux, who could perhaps speak to it at a province-wide level.
Okay. Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. What we're talking about is teacher work time. So to understand the context of that, it's defined in the teachers' provincial agreement. Teachers coming in this September will have 85% contact time with kids, 15% preparation time. So the question really is, how are we using that 85% of work time? Currently, we believe the best use of teachers is to teach. There are a variety of supervisor roles. They vary in name across the province, from lunch bus ground supervisors in Cape Breton through to school supervisors or school supervision in schools in HRCE.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to, continue on. I think this is for the deputy. In October of last year, when the Auditor General was actively working on this report, the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development stood in the House of Assembly and said, and I'll quote, "With respect to the specific question about rates of incidence, I can say, in fact, that rates of incidence have remained stable. Perhaps, though, the member opposite didn't recognize that during COVID-19, people were not in schools as frequently and we've had an increase of students in school." And I'll table that for the committee. So now that we've seen the report, the data shows that it's clearly not the case that the incidents were remaining stable. So can you explain the disconnect there between the minister's comments and what we've seen in this report? And I guess my big question is, was the department misinterpreting the data at that time?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair, for the question, and thank you, MLA LeBlanc. I am not sure what the minister was speaking about in the House. I would say it's probably appropriate to raise that with her. The Auditor General took a view on 7 years of data from one fixed point to another. We look at data from a variety of different places. I brought and I talked about today data current to this school year. I can share that. So I don't know if the minister and the AG were talking about the same frame on data. Could have been the same years or not. I'm sorry, I can't speak to that. I can tell you we are standardizing data to make sure to solve for this.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thanks. Well, it wasn't the AG speaking. It was my colleague Susie Hansen, who's the critic for education for our party, and it was in question period. And she asked the minister about the increasing rates of violence in schools, and the minister said there were the rates were not increasing. And now we know from the Auditor General's report that in fact they are increasing. So the question is, why would the minister say that they weren't increasing when they were increasing? So my question really is, where was the minister getting her data? Was the data being misinterpreted? So I guess I'll just leave that, because if you're not able to answer that, then I will just ask the next sort of follow-up. How many violent incidents have there been so far this year? You said you have the data for this year. And how many of those incidents were physical violence incidents?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. I did bring data for this year. So I do have some totals on violent incidents, as you asked. I'll share them with you. So from primary to grade 6, reported incidents that we see in our data management system for this year to June 7th. So that's just about a week ago. Sorry, I don't know the date. 2 weeks Friday. It essentially covers most of this school year, as you would say. So physical violence, 15,925 incidents from grades primary to 6. Physical violence, 3,285 reported incidents, grades 7, 8, 9. And physical violence, 1,135 incidents, grades 10, 11, 12. We also do work on this.
MLA LeBlanc.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that I also would like to have the total total violent incidents, and then broken out of that is the physical violence, because obviously violence is not just physical. So do you have non-physical violence numbers?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you for the question. I could pull out a calculator and add those three up. I don't have that total in front of me today, so can't do that mental math.
MLA LeBlanc.
Second.
That's great. Sorry, we are very conscious of how little time we have. But if you could do those calculations and get them to the committee, that would be great following. So one of the concerns raised by the Auditor General in the report is that there's no analysis conducted of the data being collected. So we see physical violence, and I will refer to my colleague in the Liberal Party and talk about how, it's different when you bring a knife to school from when 2 7-year-olds have a fight. However, those 7-year-olds having the fight, and I will say that I personally know one of them, i.e. parent one of them, and it's not nothing, right? Like, those are actually really important, and he needs supports to change his behavior so that he's not one of the ones bringing a knife to school. I mean, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but in some cases there probably is. The Auditor General is saying that there's no analysis of the data. Has that been started in terms of breaking out those types of incidents? And is there any findings you can share with us at this point?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. I believe what the Auditor General said is she didn't have evidence of analysis of the data. I think, for example, if we listen to Mr. Gallagher, he could share how they use that data regularly at regional level to make a difference for kids. Would that help answer your question better, specifically?
MLA LeBlanc.
How much time do we have?
You have 5 minutes.
Sure, real quick.
Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our school supervisors, we have 8 supervisors responsible for clusters of our total schools, which is 137. And on a monthly basis, they're looking at the most serious of incidents and having active conversations about what they're seeing there. And it's largely about deploying our resources in support of schools. And I think the deputy's comment about the need to have a better coordinated approach, I think, is a valid one, and I certainly see that in the HRCE. But we do have a great deal of support, experts that can help schools, and whether it's the equity and diversity team, our Safe Schools consultant, we have behavioral specialists and support through our student services team that we can deploy into schools. A recent example would be Astral Drive Junior High. We had a walkout there in response to a violent incident. A number of our specialists were at the school, led by the equity team, for the week afterwards to meet with kids and to hear from them about what their concerns were. They spent a week there, and I think the community expected an assembly to discuss it, which of course wasn't really the right way to go. Kids signaled very quickly that they wanted to have private conversations. They met individually and in small groups with our staff that were visiting, but also the school staff. And at the end of the week, a bit of a plan was made for next year in terms of how we support the school moving forward.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you. I'm going to move on, but I might come back to this in the second round. Sorry. When asked about what's contributing to the increase in the violence, one of the factors was overcrowding, school overcrowding. So to the deputy first, can you tell me how many schools in the province right now are over capacity?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you for the question. All of our schools have room for the kids that need to go to school. So we've added portable classrooms, modular additions in classrooms, and expand supports, change boundaries to accommodate the growth in our province. You would know that we have a very rich capital plan that's investing in expansion of schools and delivery to make sure that we have these. But regional centers work with us very closely to forecast enrollment, and we put infrastructure in place to make sure to accommodate all the children in our schools.
MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you. So then I wonder why overcrowding is being credited as one of the reasons for violence. If every school has room for every kid, then that seems like a strange correlation. HRCE has reported an increase of over 9,000 students in the past 5 years. When will the 4 new HRC schools be open for students? Maybe I'm asking you that, Mr. Gallagher. Are their schools going to be enough to meet the growth? We know that in 2022, HRC actually indicated 6 to 8 new schools were needed to meet the growth. Brand new schools were already bursting at the seams. So why only 4, and why 2 years later do we not have locations selected for those new schools?
Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The locations for those schools are, that's sort of happening beyond me, and that's the Department of Public Works, of course, so I can't really speak to that. Our job, I think, is to identify where best to locate the schools, and then we defer to our colleagues in government to take care of it for us. We're meeting regularly. We have a planning and growth team that meets every 2 weeks at the HRCE to track what's happening in our schools, and we're sharing that information with the Department of Education on a regular basis. And I would say that I wouldn't say overcrowding is connected. I would say growth is causing some of this, but that would be me making an assumption. From the perspective of there's more people in the buildings and they're bumping into each other. I think in that respect, it's likely that it's a contributing factor. Beyond that, I really wouldn't want to speculate. I think there's lots of other people who have theories as to why we've seen an increase in violence. And I think it's important to note also that this is an increase that's happened right across the country and that other school systems are grappling with it. We have responded with support of government a great deal to growth in the HRCE, and we've in the last 6 years opened 5 new schools, added 141 modular classrooms, and today we're using 60 portables on our sites. We've reconfigured the boundaries of 50 schools, and as we move into next year, we have currently 3 schools under construction. 2 of those are replacement schools, but they'll be much bigger. One is a brand new school. That's the one in Clayton Park. There are, as you noted, 4 more announced by the minister, and we're in the process of adding 28 more modular classrooms in 3 modular units for September, and we've reconfigured an additional 9 schools at this stage. Our goal is a seat for every kid in a positive and safe learning environment, and we'll keep working to make that happen.
The time has ended for the NDP caucus. We will now go to the PC party with MLA McDonald first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think everybody would agree to the statement that violence is a problem in school, and we've got more than one. But to fix a problem, you need data. And you do. You have to look at it. So my questions are probably going to be, and it's probably my IT background on Power School. I've seen it from a parent standpoint. I haven't seen it from a teacher or administrator background. And I'm sorry, am I interrupting?
No, you're not.
Okay, I can hear you.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
MLA McDonald has the floor.
So my question to you, and I think it's going to be Mr. Lutes, might be the department, is how, if there's an incident, how is it entered in Power School, and does the actual parent able to view it so they know it? And I'll start with Mr. Lutes, I think.
Mr. Lutes.
Sorry, I pressed the button here. I shouldn't have. So I can only speak to what a teacher sees. I can't really speak to what a parent sees, unfortunately, about a specific incident. So certainly when teachers, report an incident that's entered in Power School, I would say there's pretty significant inconsistencies with that approach across the province. Sometimes it's put in a log entry, which administrators don't automatically get a notification about. Sometimes it's entered into another, it's not Power Teacher, it's Power School Admin. So it's complicated, and there's significant inconsistencies, I would say, from region to region, but also school to school, how administrators are directing teachers to enter that data. And something that came that the Auditor General, I think, correctly recognized is our data, the data that we have isn't as good as it can be. And I understand that, and we're going to get better on that, and that's great. But we're never going to get good data when the focus is on a superficial lowering of violent incidents. So when teachers feel, and they identified this and the Auditor General identified this, when teachers feel pressured to not report incidents, or when teachers feel that, nothing's going to get done, nothing's going to get reported as an action, there's no point in this, nothing's going to change, or, my goodness, I've already been hit punched, kicked several times this year and nothing has happened. Why am I going to do that to myself again by reporting that? And that's really frustrating. One of the data points, talk about good data that came from the Auditor General survey, is 31% of educators indicating they experience violence in schools daily. That should shock us all. And I think, again, there's great people in the system, but we're talking, like, if a third of us had some type of safety incident in this room, there'd be a problem. And this is happening in our schools daily. And I appreciate hearing from the deputy that things are going to change going forward. And I get that. And teachers hope that is true. But teachers, and frankly our kids, have been failed before by governments making announcements and putting some report on a shelf and not really doing anything about it. And so that data, and I would say a lot of that data is not necessarily even or not just teachers, it's also our EPAs, our TAs. We have to recognize that the vast majority of our educators are female. So we have a huge number of females experiencing violence in their schools, and it's not getting dealt with appropriately by government. And again, I look forward to that changing, but it's not going to change unless there's a change in leadership tone that says, violence is our number one issue, and we're going to address it, and there's not going to be downplaying it, and we're not going to minimize it, and we're going to report it, and everyone is going to be supported to the extent that they should be. And right now, what I hear, and I think what the Auditor General heard from our educators, is that's not happening.
MLA McDonald?
I'll let Mr. Armstrong, if he wants to comment onto it.
Dr. Armstrong.
Sure. Across the 7 regions in the CSAP, there's different instructions to administrators, to teachers, of how to report incidents. It varies from region to region. There are some regions where teachers can go on Power School admin and make a report of an incident. There are other regions where the administrator is the one that goes on Power School admin and makes the report of an incident. The teacher may do that in a written format, or may, as President LeRoux said, do through log entry. So the minister in the fall, working with our committee, asked teachers to record all incidents. So we start to have every incident recorded to build better data, and there is a commitment for a province-wide approach to reporting. And as you said, MLA McDonald, that will give us a good database to work from going forward. I look forward to that as an administrator. I'm returning to my school in September, where the incidents that I report or teachers report will be consistent across the province. This stems from the fact that we had elected school boards for many, many decades in Nova Scotia. School boards kind of ran their own styles of reporting, but now that we have a different system other than the CSAP, some consistent reporting, some instructions that are province-wide is something our members would welcome.
MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So getting to that, now I hear there's Power School and Power School admin. So I guess I'll make sure I say Power School admin then, since it's there. The Power School is the parents interface, and Power School admin is kind of the schools. So again, come from an IT. What training do we give people on how to fill it out? Because, and I guess I'll go to the department on this, because I write software, and if I don't train somebody how to use it, I guarantee you I get a lot of support calls. So for me, what training do we put in? Like, do you have what I would call train the trainer, which are experts that somebody contact on that? And Deputy Minister.
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. It's certain that we have different actions to take going forward as far as working with staff on how best to use the tools to make sure we have different data standards and to make sure that we can make good decisions based on what's in that. We put a lot of weight in Power School, how we have the student database. We've also heard from NSTU already on make it easier for teachers. We can't do this with the convoluted, do I use this one or that one, this one doesn't talk to that one. We've solved that. We have information going out this week to say we've done that. We have other improvements we have to make. Currently, there are a variety of ways that we train staff to use these tools. They vary on what access to what parts of this database do you need and for what purpose, because they're used for programming. If you need access to attendance, you should see that. Do you need access to phone numbers and personal information? So all of those things are in our training. Most of the resources for teachers that they would use to take attendance, to work with, would be online as well. And employers, would train new staff at school level on what do you need to do and how do you use the tools you need to get things going in the school year. Clearly, if we change what we want out of this tool and we change some of the elements of it, we're going to make sure that there's a robust training so that everyone knows how best do we use this so that we're not just warehousing data, we're actually taking wisdom from that to guide good actions going forward.
MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm glad that, because yes, if you've got a bunch of data and you don't look at it, it's kind of useless, right? You've had people waste their time. So I assume then, so somebody will have to explain. So Power School, a student is assigned an ID. Does that ID stay with them? So if they were to be in CSAP and then go to HER and then go to CR, does all their data go so that the next school has the details for it? Or is it a I don't know who wants to take that. It looks like Deputy Minister is nodding, Madam Chair.
Thank you. He nods a lot.
Yes.
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm certainly happy to have other members participate in the conversation this morning. But the answer to your question, in Nova Scotia, we all have a unique health number. It follows our health record. We access it every time. In Nova Scotia, students have a unique education number. It follows with them all of the time. Some data flows year to year to year to year. Some doesn't. The data that's needed to flow would. Data that shouldn't does not. There are some data standards around that. But yes, if a student moves from region to region, all of the necessary information to support their continued education in Nova Scotia would flow with them with that unique identification number.
MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my, I think, last question is going to be in Power School, and I'll defer to who's entered it to be able to enter this. So let's just say somebody had a incident, and we'll pick high school just for the heck of it, because I do agree. Elementary, you're going to have issues, it's different. But there was some bullying reported, there was an assault, physical. So does Power School have the ability today, or is it being requested to change so it can show that, okay, these are the incidents, not just one, because obviously there could be multiple things happening. Yes, I understand numbers will go up, but the point is you want to know how many bullying really, not, oh, I flagged it in bullying, although that. So I'm not sure who wants to answer that question. Mr. Armstrong seems to be shifting. So I guess I'll give it to Mr. Armstrong first.
Dr. Armstrong.
So typically when there's an incident on Power School Admin, when you're categorizing that incident, there's a drop-down menu where you can only select one incident. And that's something at our committee that we're working with the department and then NSTU we've discussed, and hopefully we'll be able to manipulate that so you can include multiple incidents. Because physical violence is one of the drop-down menus. Bringing a weapon to school is another. Bullying would be another. There's a whole cachet of different ways you can categorize incidents. But as anyone that's used Power School knows sometimes these incidents overlap several of those categories, so it becomes a judgment call of which one to categorize it as. So hopefully we're able to work with the software provider and have the ability to indicate multiple categories for incidents.
MLA McDonald.
So I'll just ask a follow-up to the Deputy Minister. So that is something that's in the works to talk to the service provider, which would be Power School, to make that ability?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we're taking action on this. What I would say at a high level is form follows function. We need to make sure we decide what is it we need out of this. If we're going to ask an entire workforce to invest in, please write that down, please record that, please make sure it's accurate in this way, then we have to take that and do something with it. We have to make sure at school level, classroom and school, that data is helping guide how we're using our resources. What are we paying attention to? Is there a trend evolving here that we need to do something about? As well as shared earlier, at a regional level, what are we doing well? What are we having success with? And what isn't being solved? If, for example, classrooms are being disrupted by the same student regularly, that there needs to be a decisive response on that. It's not okay to continue. We have to make sure that when we're making decisions, they're based on good data, good standards, reliable and accurate. And then we're doing something, I'll say, immediate for action to make sure that people go to school and thrive in our schools.
MLA McDonald.
I will defer to MLA Taggart, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. MLA Taggart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not sure where to start, but, we all, as elected folks, we hear from parents and children and teachers regularly. Even within Colchester North, which is a small part of the Signecto Central Regional, there's significant differences in the way each school is operated or managed. And I have to assume, and maybe that's not a good thing, that the Department of Education has an Education Act, and I don't know when it was last updated or whatever, but it lays out the way schools are supposed to be operated. And since I've sat down here today, I just made note of different regions have different ways of reporting, significant differences across the province, region to region, school to school. Different instructions in each region. I've heard from teachers the very same thing that somebody else has said here today, that they're under pressure to not report violent incidents because, they don't want to be, because of the, whatever the. So I guess if I could to Dr. Armstrong, so as an administrator, how can that be? Is there that much gray area? How can that be that there's, how can that be?
Dr. Armstrong.
So we have one unifying document in terms of discipline in managing schools, which is the Code of Conduct. And the Code of Conduct does give a range of responses. Each administrator of each school, whether it be the principal or a vice principal, is a highly trained. They have multiple graduate degrees. They understand school leadership. They're experts at school finance. They also are experts at curriculum and instruction and implementation. And they also have leadership training in how to deal with student discipline. So that training is what those administrators rely on. Each case that comes to the office is a one-off case, and you have to make a judgment call of what is best for the school, that classroom, and that student, or multiple students, as you make decisions of how to respond. And I guess that's the response. The Code of Conduct does give some flexibility, but in severe cases of severe incidents, it tells you kind of what you do. So if you have a fist fight on the playground, typically at a high school level, that would be 5 days of suspension. And then you would put a program in place when they come back. So there's a lot more consistency than maybe you've heard here this morning because of that Code of Conduct that you were required to follow as an administrator. But there is some flexibility, like we talked about at the lower elementary level. You're going to respond differently to an incident than you would at a high school level. And if you look at the incidents that the Deputy Minister put out today, we're dealing with a lot more incidents at the lower elementary than we've seen before since the pandemic. And this is consistent across North America. It's not just something we're seeing in Nova Scotia. Something happened during that pandemic in terms of socialization that has led to more incidents at the lower elementary level. We're seeing behaviors probably at the lower elementary level we really haven't seen or dealt with before. And those administrators at the lower elementary level are dealing with incidents probably a little more severe than they've had experience. So that would indicate some of the differences you might see, because in your riding you would have small elementary schools like Great Village, but you'd also have larger schools like CEC and Central Colchester. Chad McPherson in Central Colchester, I'm sure he deals with every incident that comes to his office in a very effective way, well-respected administrator. But he's going to deal with an incident a little differently than the principal of Great Village, who has 2 grade 6 students who squabble over a ball in the playground.
MLA Taggart.
Thank you, Chair. So just if I could follow up, Public School Administrators Association, Dr. Armstrong, you have a wonderful reputation in the schools that you've been in, but somebody above you gives direction too, and so that's part of this administration group too. Am I correct? And how much do they influence? And maybe not so much yours, because you have a long, tenured school principal. But how much do they influence policy in the way policy is followed in a particular school?
Dr. Armstrong.
So if an incident's reported to the office, and say it's a severe incident, something that you may not have seen before, or something where it's going to require what we call an extended suspension, more than 10 days, you would be in touch with a supervisor. So every administrator has someone that's their superior. In the HRCE and Signeto Central Regional School Board, that would be a school supervisor, family school supervisor. And if something happened, I might give them a call right away to say, listen, this is what's happened, this is my investigation has showed, this is what my plan is to respond to this. And I might collaborate with them a bit of if that's accurate or how that should be dealt with. But I can tell you that no one in my career, and I've been doing administration off and on since 1994, has ever told me don't suspend a student or keep those incidents down. I just don't think that's an accurate statement. There's been no effort to do that. I have not heard other administrators complain of that. But we do collaborate with each other of how to respond when it is a serious incident that may involve some extenuating circumstances. And that's where we work together. Just like you as MLAs would meet together to talk about policy and how to implement it and how to write a party platform, we do the same thing as administrators. We talk to each other. And we may have to talk to administrators in other schools, but there's always someone that's a supervisor that we can call and collaborate with as we're responding to a more challenging and more complex situation.
MLA Taggart with under 2 minutes left.
I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand it off. No? Okay, well. I'm still a little bit hung up on this, this whole hierarchy of the regional education centers. And I really need to fully understand that, because it just seems, and it has been, and I know I'm repeating myself, but and maybe somebody else would be happy to jump in here. I'd love to hear from them. But it just seems that there's no consistency across the board. And, you know, when we hear of teachers going from 7 of whatever to, you know, less time in classrooms. I forget the phrase that was used, but I just fail to understand how there can be so much inconsistency amongst and I know there's big buildings full of administrators that are not in the classroom, and I wonder how many of those have been in the classroom and how much they influence what's happening on the ground in our schools today. Would anybody like to take a...
If anybody can, they have to do it in 10 seconds.
Oh, geez. I'll ask it again.
So, I'm going to have to call order because it's now the time has elapsed. And we will go to the second round of questions where we have 13 minutes, and we will go to the Liberal Party first. And I acknowledge MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to start brief comment because I don't want to retread on ground, but I heard Mr. Gallagher when I came back in talking about overcrowding, and he knows very well, we've talked about it many times, but it's a big issue. And I think it's certainly part of this issue the AG identifies. You know, CP Allen's in my riding. It's one of the biggest schools in the province. It's been overcrowded almost since it opened. West Bedford School, which opened in September, great administrators, Dr. Armstrong mentioned, awesome school, 50% over capacity, you know, by the end of year 1. And those things have consequences across the board, including in managing behaviors. I think that just makes sense. So I think that's a big issue, and you know, I'll keep pleading on this, but we need to be building schools faster in HRM in particular, and in places that are growing fast and where the need is. I think there's no doubt about that. So wanted to touch on teaching assistants, TAs as well. So Mr. Lutes mentioned that I think 31% of teachers were reporting daily violence, which is of course far too high, but it's much worse with TAs actually. 45%, so almost half of the TAs were reporting violent incidents every day. And some were saying, well, my whole day is almost an incident. So how do I parse that out? How do I break it down? Which is, you know, horrible to think about, that's the circumstances some people are going through on a daily basis. But that's hard enough. And then there's another challenge in which, you know, TAs don't have access to Power School, for example. So you have to go, you know, to a teacher or to an administrator and say, you know, sorry, do you mind doing this for me? Which is another barrier. So And maybe there's a reason for that I haven't seen, but I'm wondering, maybe, I don't know if I'll direct it to Deputy LeRoux, and if somebody else is suited to answer, please. But why do TAs not have access to Power School? Is that something that we could change?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. MLA Clark. Annie Baert would probably be able to give you detailed information if you're interested. The answer to your question is to understand EAs, TAs, APAs, assistants work in schools across the province. They work supervised by principal, but under the direction of a teacher. So if there are concerns in programming that an EA is delivering, typically it's done by reporting to the teacher, to working with teacher. Some of those things should be reported in Power School. Others should be corrected or responded to by teacher. We've heard that EAs have concern about that, and no EA should go to work and be hurt in the workplace. Some EAs would have protective equipment because they're hired to work with children who have particular behavioral requirements, and protective equipment is part of that. But can they? Yes. So what we've said is, as we create this umbrella and new provincial school code of conduct policy connected with emergency management planning, connected with behavioral strategy, we're going to respond to community and community of employees saying, make it clearer. Can we be sure? We don't need specific directions. We're professionals, but there seems to be more variance than ought need be. Can you give better guidance, better frames on how these things work together? And that will include employee groups like EAs. What do we expect a caretaker to do in a building if they witness, if they are injured? So those are the kinds of things that we will
MLA
ensure.
Clark.
Thank you, Deputy. And I appreciate what you're saying. My question, though, is the intention to have EAs, TAs, assistants in the classroom have access to Power School to report these incidents on their own, independently of a teacher? Is that going to be a change that's made, yes or no, or we don't know yet?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I can say is we're absolutely going to have that conversation and figure out what does our system need in order to make sure when we move forward, we're intentional about what's the best way to do that.
Okay.
MLA Clark.
Great, thank you. I also wanted to just clarify timing of something here. So the Code of Conduct, reworking, reimagining of the Code of Conduct, which is an important part of this conversation, obviously. Last week or maybe the week before, whenever the Auditor General had her press conference on this topic, the timeline at that point was, I believe, next September. So September 2025 was the idea that the Code of Conduct would be in place. Deputy, you made some comments earlier that seemed to me to suggest it would be sooner than that. So could you just clarify, so I understand, when will we actually have the new Code of Conduct, put a bow on it and it's in place?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, MLA Clark. We have heard from community that this work needs to be accelerated. The minister has given direction, move faster on that. So currently it is out for consultation with school advisory council members, parents, staff, community members, students, and it's currently out for feedback. It is our intention to continue accelerate that work. We bring together for the first time every school advisory council from across the province for an inaugural conference at the end of September. We have that as a target to bring forward a near draft policy for implementation. That would be a great opportunity for us to hear from folks in every school region right across the province, from parents, from staff, and again, we will continue to work with all of our partners. That work will be pivotal. It will be one of the anchors in what we're moving forward with. So we do intend to make sure to give time to everyone to add feedback and input to that, and we would invite people to please take part.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So based on that, if the goal is to bring forward a draft policy in September, end of September, is it reasonable to say that we should have a new Code of Conduct in place at some point during this upcoming school year, the 24 to 25 school year. Is that reasonable to say?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we want to keep our eye on is the bigger picture as well. So yes, we may have elements of it ready to go sooner. The minister has asked that that be accelerated, so I have to deliver on that, and we will, without question. But we also need to make sure, as we develop other components, that we don't miss that we were asked to make sure they make better sense together, that there is a harmony, if you will, and that staff aren't confused with, does this relate to that? That collectively, with a new behavior strategy, that actually aligns with what people are telling us in a new provincial school code of conduct policy. So the answer is yes, we intend to have it. And I say near final because we do have to make sure that people don't feel, oh, it's changing again, it's changing again. It's going to be developed in an accelerated way for the fall, with the flexibility to make sure with NSTU, PSANS, with other employee groups, that we're hitting the mark on what we're intending to do with the combined forest, if you will, on these.
MLA Clark.
Thank you, Deputy. I also wanted to ask, one of the things I agree with colleagues of mine that have made this point that I touched on earlier, but it just seems like there hasn't been a level of coordination or consistency across the board, which has trickled down and caused problems in all kinds of different ways. And this is something that the AG touched on in her report, paragraph 1.13. She says, writes, while all educators, support staff, and other positions contribute to preventing and addressing violence in schools, there is no one position at the department, HRCE, or CSAP responsible for overseeing violent incidents in schools. I guess my question to you, Deputy LeRoux, is should there be one kind of person whose sole job it is to tackle this issue and make sure that, again, we move things in the right direction?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you. As I've said, we are acting. We're trying to figure out how do we respond to what the AG has offered and the wisdom that we see in all of the recommendations. Who's responsible to create safe and inclusive schools? That's a shared responsibility among us all. So all staff, all professionals, all of us have a responsibility to that. But we may need some dedicated resources to draw greater attention to it. I can tell you that we do have a point person. We have a consultant at the department who is leading this work for us and began last fall, recognizing the importance of, we want to see this completed. We want to bring the urgency that we're hearing from NSTU and others, and we want to show action. So that's been very helpful to us. If we determine that that is necessary in a path forward, it's on the table, as well as regions and the CSAP. We want to make sure that every student goes to school and thrives. If that is going to require another adult to be the champion, to be the lead, to be the point person, to coordinate, to facilitate, then we would certainly see that that's really important. We'll look to partners like NSTU and PSANS and the regions to help guide that work. But fundamentally, our goal is every student has to be successful in school. We create the environment collectively. We wouldn't want people to think, oh, that's their responsibility. Our relationships with students
MLA
create
Clark
the
with
environment.
just over 2 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy. And I agree with your point that obviously it's a collective responsibility. It's a shared responsibility. The tricky part of that, of course, is when it's a shared collective responsibility, sometimes there's no person for whom the buck stops, right, I guess? And that's kind of the tension that I wanted to draw on. So I appreciate your comments on that. Mr. Collette, I wanted to get a question into you if I could. And again, I'm putting you on the spot, probably with not a lot of time. But as you know, in the report, the CSAP unfortunately had the highest incident percentage rate of violence in schools. So I'm just wondering if you could give your perspective on that, and if there's anything you wanted to kind of lay out to the committee that CSAP is doing, or just your reflections on the overall issue and how you can address it in your schools in particular. Thank you.
Monsieur Collette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for the question. There's no doubt that CSAP has been working on a new strategic plan for over a year, and that strategic plan has been approved. It's based in data and in consultation. So when the minister gave direction to document everything, It was anchored by CSAP in we're discussing a strategic plan, we're researching, we want staff to document everything. So we were very, very adamant with staff, principals, and teachers that the minister's direction was clear, document everything. So do I believe that CSAP has more incidents than everybody else? Not necessarily. Do I think CSAP has taken that directive very seriously? I do.
MLA Clark with 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Collette, and I think that's an important point, right? Is our conclusions are only as good as our data, and sometimes it's hard to know where the numbers actually are, and if something's happening but not being reported, it's like a tree falling in the forest. It doesn't make a sound. Who knows, right? So I think that's an important point you raised, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now go to the NDP with MLA Lachance.
Thank you. So I want to step back a little bit from the questions around data and current incidents. And I'm quite concerned about how children and youth are doing in this province across a range of indicators. So school violence being one of them, but also, we've seen absolute and relative increases in children living in poverty in this province. We know that families and children and youth are under stress to, have enough to eat, to be able to stay in their homes. And so I think there's some sort of bigger issue. And while all of those are not issues necessarily in the mandate of the Department of Education, of course, this is where young people spend the majority of their time. And of course, you bring your whole self to school. So, we have the inclusive education policy. I believe there's an evaluation overdue for that. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that, if there's an evaluation upcoming for inclusive education. On other inclusion issues, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission is expressing deep concern about a rise into us LGBTQI plus hate, and certainly young people are experiencing that, and we know that in our student success survey. So 42% of queer students reported feeling unsafe last year. So I'm also wondering, when will the new guidelines be released to support trans and gender diverse students? So 2 questions around inclusion: the evaluation of inclusive education and the guidelines.
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Annie Baert would like to answer these questions.
Ms. Baert.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, MLA Lachance. So in terms of inclusive education, I'll start with the first part of that question, and it gives me the opportunity to speak a little bit about Schools Plus, which is unique in Nova Scotia in terms of offering wraparound supports for families to address some of those indicators that you brought forward around access to food, access to tools and resources that may help them engage successfully in their school and in their learning experience. So as of this past September, we now have Schools Plus support available in all 372 of our schools across the province, and this is including 65 hub sites. So every county has a hub site for Schools Plus. This big piece of that hub site is access to social workers who help coordinate access to those supports and make those community
MLA
connections.
Lachance.
So we're so stressed for time, so I want to apologize. Schools Plus is absolutely an important part of the picture, but I just specifically wanted to get back to the inclusive education policy and if there's an evaluation underway, and the guidelines for trans and gender diverse students.
Ms. Baert.
In terms of the guidelines for supporting, currently from 2014, the guidelines are supporting transgender and gender nonconforming students. Those guidelines lay out very clear direction for us in terms of how we ensure all students feel safe in our schools, and we are committed and recognize that data that you pointed to and from our student success survey. We are currently doing work in consultation and a lot of consultation with students themselves around how they would see and what they need from their schools to be able to feel safe in those schools.
MLA Lachance.
Sorry, I am aware of the process that's ongoing, and estimates, I asked the minister when they would be released, and I recall I thought it was June, this month. So when will the guidelines be released?
Ms. Baert.
So I would say that the guidelines will be aligned and released with the other components of the work that is happening around safe and inclusive schools. So our expectation is that work will continue into the 2024-25 school year.
MLA Lachance.
And inclusive education, is there an evaluation underway of the inclusive education policy?
Ms. Baert.
I think what we're referring to is there was a commitment to a developmental evaluation, and we were working in partnership with researchers from University of Ontario, or Ottawa, sorry. We received the first phase of that evaluation, and now we are looking at currently how we can continue to build on the recommendations that came forward in that piece of work.
MLA Lachance.
And, I mean, as it stands, do you feel the inclusive education policy is successful?
Ms. Baert.
The inclusive education policy, thank you for that question, thank you. The inclusive education policy is our province's commitment to ensure that all students feel safe and included in schools, and that is something that is substantiated within the Education Act. We've put in significant investments since the launch of that policy in 2019, and we are seeing impact to all those investments that have been made. The third part of the response to the Auditor General's report is the development and alignment of a behavior strategy, which will allow us to, in a more meaningful way, gauge the impact of the investments and how the inclusive education policy is supporting all learners in our province.
MLA LeBlanc.
So just on this, there's a bit of an elephant in the room, which is the folks that work closest to the students who need the help with inclusion, and that is the TAs and the EPAs, and a number of them are represented here today. And we know, because of their labor struggles in the last year or two, that compensation and working conditions need to be a part of the conversation on school violence. And we haven't really touched on that today, and I really think that we should have another meeting, but that's a motion for later. The risk of violence increases when the workers are overworked. It increases when workers are short-staffed because pay is too low. It increases when workers have to go to a second job instead of taking the time to recover and heal from incidents. So does retention and compensation factor into the province's commitments when we're talking about the inclusion policy in particular, but when we're talking about school violence in general?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. What I think I've been trying to say today is we are taking action, and part of that action is working with our staff. So we have to be open to listen to what's coming forward if we're going to be sure to get to the goal. I can't yet say what we will or won't do. What I can guarantee is we're inviting all of our community, especially our workers, to let us know what's important in this work. What are we missing? The Auditor General has said we need
MLA
guidelines.
LeBlanc, sorry.
I'm sorry. Respectfully, Deputy, we again don't have much time. How much time do we have?
You have 6 minutes.
So I will just speak very quickly personally. So I have a child who could benefit very well, I guess, from the help of an EPA. And he, to date, has not been granted an EPA because I'm assuming because there's no budget for it. The principal puts in for it, and we know that it would increase his success at school, but it's just not there. So I know you can't tell us what you're going to do, but is there a commitment to making sure that every child, and a real commitment, and that means dollars and cents, like this is the Public Accounts Committee, we're talking about budgets, we're talking about people who are paid well to do the work to support the students. So is there a commitment today, or will there be, in any time soon, to EPAs and support staff to assist teachers and to assist students so that every child can grow and learn in the way that they need to be able to.
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, MLA LeBlanc. I'm not trying to avoid your question. Nothing is off the table. I can guarantee you we will do this work in earnest and bring forward recommendations that we think will make the greatest difference. What we want to be careful of, in the absence of the right support, an EA looks really good. And that's not to say an appropriate EA isn't appropriate. But if someone needs help with a behavior, it may not be an EA. It may be a behavior strategist. In the absence of the strategist, I need an EA. I have communication issues. What you really need is a speech-language pathologist. in the absence of an SLP, I'm left with. So we will
MLA
work.
LeBlanc.
So then I extrapolate the question to all of those people. Yes, those are all part of the inclusion too. So is the commitment there to all of those positions?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for the question. I can make a commitment today that we are doing this work in earnest. Our ministers said do it quicker. There is no intention to not do it thoroughly and to come forward with recommendations, investments, ideas collectively that we believe are going to create the environment in our schools where students thrive and staff go every single day and are able to do their best at work.
MLA LeBlanc with 3.5 minutes.
I guess, Mr. Lutes, would you say that would be like that you're seeing that commitment? Would you say that there's more to be done? Like, where are you on this in terms of the teachers themselves, but also the supports, also the specialists and all that?
Mr. Lutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say that I think from most teachers' perspective, the inclusion policy is not being implemented in the way. It requires, like you said, more dollars and cents to go into humans. I think that right now we're seeing a significant number of violence in schools from students who are not being properly supported. They, like your little kiddo, deserves an EPA. Instead, that EA or TA is shared between 4 or 5 students who have complex needs. And again, I hear this often from teachers is that, there was a violent incident in my class today. I know that kiddo doesn't want to act out in that way, needs more support, but that EA is stretched so thin. I'm stretched so thin. My Learning Center teacher caseload is off the charts. My SLP, I don't even know what my SLP looks like because they're in so many schools. So I appreciate that, it requires time to figure things out. What I'm frustrated with, I'm not hearing the commitment to dollars and cents. It was recognized through the AG from teachers that our classrooms are more complex than ever. Our classrooms are more diverse than ever. And if you listen to educators, which is frankly the only data that I need, listen to teachers, they tell you my kids aren't getting what they need. And that's not acceptable.
MLA LeBlanc.
Great. Just a quick question, I guess, to close this part. We know we've heard a commitment to improving data collection, and the report highlights that the data is limited and inconsistent and overall problematic. And Monsieur Collette, your comment I think demonstrates that pretty clearly. Will the department be sharing the data that is collected and improved with the unions representing the workers that are experiencing and reporting the incidents, i.e. the teachers union, the CUPE, and then I think it's maybe NSGU in a small part?
Who are you directing the question?
Oh, Mr. LeRoux, please.
Mr. LeRoux? Deputy LeRoux, is that who you said?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, the department has been collecting data. I would remind us that the minister has asked staff to make sure that that data is accurate in her letter of November 7th. We will be, we constantly use, and much of that data is in the public realm now. It has been FOIPOPed by a number of regions, by a number of entities, and the data is in the public realm. We are working to identify how would we publish this data. For example, how do we control for population growth and not just incidents so that we get a true sense of what's happening in our schools? We're working on that now. The minister has asked us to make sure to have that as we work on that total
MLA
umbrella
LeBlanc
approach.
with 15 seconds.
Final question for anyone who'd like to ask or answer. Where, when you plug in Power School, what's happening, where is there a thing that says, why did this happen? Anyone?
Good timing with order. Time is up. Now we'll go to the PC party with MLA Sheehy Richard. Oh, okay, MLA Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, this is an incredibly important topic to I think everyone can agree on that. I have school-aged children and friends that are teachers, family that are teachers and stuff. I end up doing a jurisdictional scan in preparation for this meeting, just looking what other places do. I mean, violence in school is not unique to Nova Scotia, but their approach and how they address it seems to be different throughout the world. And just to help me better understand and perhaps effectively address it, I'm going to expand on what Deputy LeRoux had said and maybe even establish a baseline. I'd ask all witnesses, like, who's responsible for violence in schools? I'll start with Mr. Lutes and then.
Okay, Mr. Lutes.
Can I clarify who's responsible at ensuring schools are safe, or who's responsible for the violence? Because I'm not understanding
Please
your
clarify,
question.
MLA Young.
Yeah, who's responsible, like, for addressing the violence in schools?
Mr. Lutes.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's the Department of Education who are ultimately responsible. But at the end of the, in terms of providing policies, in terms of providing enough supports to make sure that our students and kids are getting what they need, I think it's at the end of the day, our society is complicated, but our kids come to the door, and I get that kid. It doesn't matter if that kid doesn't have enough to eat or comes from poverty. Like, I'm going to try to do my level best with that student, and I think that's what that student deserves. It's like I said, a lack of focus that the AG had pointed out from the department as to why we're here. We've had conversations about violence in schools for a number of years, and it's taken the Auditor General for us to have this conversation here. And I think that's a disservice to our educators, and it's a disservice to our kids. At the end of the day, our kids come to the door, and they deserve the education system to support them. And right now, because I think of classrooms that are more complex than ever, more diverse than ever, and funding that hasn't kept up with that support is not happening for those students. The buck has to stop somewhere, and it stops with government funding our schools to make sure all our kids and educators are getting what they need. And I think, again, by the fact that our violence is up in schools by 60%. That should shock us. Almost a third of our educators are experiencing violence daily. That should shock us. And I'm frustrated that it's taken an AG to get us here to actually looking at the issue, because teachers have been saying it, and I think parents have been saying it for a number of years. So I'm frustrated. I'm hopeful that some things I heard today I was excited about, but I think there's also been a little bit of minimizing the data. Oh, that's not quite what is going on in schools. If teachers and kids are not getting the supports they need, believe them. They're telling you that, and that they've been telling you this for a number of years.
MLA Young.
Yeah, I'll pass it off to Dr. Armstrong. Same question.
Dr. Armstrong with the same question.
Well, at the school site, there's no doubt that our members are responsible for making a school climate which is safe and inclusive of all students. Our administrators, as I mentioned before, are highly trained professionals. We work with people at the regional centers to try to allocate and implement resources where needed. There's been great changes in schools over the last several years. We have more money for breakfast and learning. We have more staff in schools. Schools Plus has been a great advantage to schools across the province. But in the end, it's up to the school administration to support our teachers in the classroom and put practices and procedures in place to keep everyone safe. So in a lot of ways, the buck does stop with the principal and the vice principals and the school-based administration with the support of resources allocated to the regional center.
And now Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great question, so thank you for the question. I would echo what my colleague said from the NSTU. There is great responsibility at the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. Our minister accepts that, and our minister is giving good direction about that. I also appreciate in the AG's report, she calls on strong leadership and community commitment. Our staff work very hard. We have great people working in our schools, and they're saying it's getting harder. That calls on us to do things differently. We hear them. We appreciate the detail that's coming, and we do need to act with urgency, but we can't act alone. If we go alone on this, we're not going to have people with us. I appreciate hearing from parents around the room who say, my child could. Parents have a role in this, in the understanding, in participation. Our goal is not to get a new policy out the door. It's to assure students and staff are successful in the work they do and in the learning environments we create. There are roles and responsibilities in the Act. There are professional standards for teachers, administrators. We share the responsibility, but don't hear that as it's not the department. The minister has said, and I will echo, we have a lot of responsibility to this, and we have a lot of control. We accept that. And if I may, the NSTU asked, like in my words, I've heard this before. So let me say for the record, violence is a significant issue. Direction to staff, do not downplay, do not minimize. If we want to make sure, that's what we're saying. Our minister has said in November, I say for the record, report as indicated in the minister's record of November 7th or November of this year. And I'd also call people to where you're the frustration, you are the solution. Help us see, participate in what will make this better. Because we bring together about 200,000 people a day, and then we go away. And then we come back, 200,000 people with staff, students, volunteers. That's double the size of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality every day. We work and we live in community. It will take community, and we'll have differences of opinion. But we do need a little more guidance. We value professional judgment, but we've heard it ain't working. Something's off. And we accept the responsibility to say, we've got it. We will make sure to bring something different that is promising, and we will iterate to make sure until it's making a difference, and we will track it. We will have good evidence that has a standard that we can all look to understand clearly, are we getting at it? Right now, if someone said, you have $1 million, what would you do? I'm not 100% sure. Would we just put in more EAs? They may put the data down, but they won't help if someone has a speech problem that we're masking. So we want to hear from community, especially our employees, and help us bring forward solutions. Ideas for Education is doing that. We have an online portal. Teachers have pilots happening right now. I think I could use a child youth care practitioner differently. Here's a pilot, you do it. I think I need different supports in this area and I get a bigger difference. Here's a pilot, you can do it. We're looking to frontline staff, tell us, experiment with us, do action research. Our goal is not to control, our goal is for kids to thrive in public education. And together we can do that, we absolutely can. We accept, we have a lot of responsibility here and we're going to get at it in earnest. Thank you.
MLA Sheehy Richard.
How many minutes, Madam Chair?
A little less than 5.
Okay, thank you. As my colleague said, obviously this is an extremely, extremely important subject. I mean, I'm a mother of 3. My youngest graduated last year, and, I agree, like COVID played havoc on our children. I also ran a daycare during COVID and experienced, the extra effort that was involved to try to bring things through. But when the kids went back into the classrooms, really basically all kind of broke loose. It's just a whole different society for those very critical years in development. So when I looked at this report and had the opportunity to hear from the Auditor General on it in a little bit more depth, 2025 did not really seem practical. So I feel very, feel very optimistic in your immediate open. That was my angle of questioning, was basically why that long when it's such an urgent issue. So I am quite pleased to think that this fall we're going to have some more consistency, at least some steps in the right direction to actually looking at trying to address this for all of our kids' sakes. I mean, they're our future. And it means a lot to me. But you touched on something that we kind of keep going around and around and around what the department's doing in this policy. But it's really key when you talk about community and a role that parents and guardians can play in helping preventing violence in schools, because it does need to be some buy-in. And I guess what I'm asking is, when you're looking at this over the course of summer, because basically you've got a couple months here, like, is there a voice? Are we hearing a voice from the parent level to try to convince the parent also to trust the administrators and the teachers and the EAs in the classroom to work with the children on the behavioral issues? Because I know that sometimes, when I'm trying to bring it up in my circumstance of the daycare situation, it was sometimes tough because little Johnny maybe wasn't really that way when you're trying to reiterate that. So I guess, is there going to be a voice at a parent level as well through the SACs or parent advisory councils or whatever they're properly known as now? Can you talk to that a little?
Deputy LeRoux.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So, Yes, our minister has, as you would know, directed us to create SACs and to make sure they are well established in communities. The minister is bringing together SACs provincially for the first time this September. They represent local voice. They represent the voices of parents, of students, of teachers, and other staff within our schools. So currently, we are listening to SACs as this policy draft is out for consultation. So SACs currently have the opportunity in a virtual town hall to be providing feedback on this very important policy development. I think as we come forward in September with a draft of sorts, that it will be the opportunity for them collectively together to spend focused time on, are we getting it right? Does it need to iterate? The voice of parents and community is really important in this. I know my colleagues could help even describe what they're doing at regional and school levels. Our RED superintendent also have a regional council with families, with SACs. They have a regional council with students, hearing voices from folks to influence. Their advisory. Help me understand how best this is going to work in this community. Help me understand best if we're going to communicate about school violence, about different expectations for students. How do we make sure we get that right? How do we make sure in our elementary school we make a positive difference? How do we make sure that people understand in this high school how you have to have a conversation with your children about going to school in community with your peers? Those are the kinds of things that we see happening at our conference.
You have 50 seconds left. PC Caucus, MLA Sheehy Richard?
If there's only 15 seconds, I know my colleague wanted to, but I did want to just ask a quick question. Like, so when you talk about the cell phone directive that you just did, I mean, kudos to that, because I do feel that that's coming from there. So was that part of the piece of this work that you started like last fall, for example? Was that part of that, or was that something, like, is that related to the behavioral?
Deputy LeRoux, you have 15 seconds.
Our minister did make a directive around cell phones. Her intention is to make sure we respond to what we're hearing in community and that we set the conditions for learning. Although there's great value right now, we're hearing probably better if we don't have them in our schools. We will also discuss that with SACs.
Time has elapsed. Thank you. Call in order. And now, as it is custom, we will call on for closing remarks, and I will start with the Deputy Minister LeRoux.
I would offer my thanks for bringing this forward today. Thank you to the Auditor General and her team for the work. We appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. We'll work together with our partners as we continue the work forward. Thank you for the opportunity.
And as we had opening remarks, I will go to closing remarks for Mr. Lutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having this really important conversation. Like I said, I believe that violence in our schools is a significant issue. It's the #1 issue facing our educators. If kids don't have a safe and learning environments, they're not learning. If our educators don't have safe learning environments, they're not giving their best work. They're trying their level best, but right now I think the system is failing them to a certain extent. And I'm encouraged by some of the words that I've heard here today. Like I said, I think we're at a crossroad, and I think that the AG's recommendations need to be swiftly and line by line, every one of them taken, and done so in earnest. And frankly, education has been failed by recommendations that haven't gone anywhere, and our kids deserve better than that. I recognize things take time, but every minute that goes by that our schools aren't as safe as they can be are kids falling through the cracks, and teachers and educators falling through the cracks, and principals falling through the cracks, and we need to do better for them.
Thank you. Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to close by saying that schools are microcosms of greater society. And we have seen an increase since the pandemic in intensity of violent incidents, in conflict. We've had the basketball in Nova Scotia have to close schools during the year, so parents couldn't go watch basketball games, not being able to see their own children because of some of the behavior of adults. Children see that. And we need everyone in the community to understand that we are modeling at all times. And if adults in communities and adults in society display conflict and display aggressive behavior, students are going to see that too. So I think there's a combined responsibility of everyone, parents, educators, greater society, leaders, criminal justice and other authorities. We need to get together and change the way our society is behaving because our children are watching every day.
So thank you for your presentations and being here today. I will now see if there's an appetite to have a little bit of a recess to clear the... No? Not much time. Okay. So thank you. I guess you may leave. And we will go on to the next agenda item, which is correspondence. Is there any discussion on the correspondence in your agenda package? Not seeing any. And I believe MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a motion here that I'd like to read. Whereas the Auditor General's report makes clear that another school year cannot pass without action from the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development to reduce violence in our schools, I move that this committee requests that Department of Education and Early Childhood Development work to implement the recommendations from this report before the next school year begins, including providing clear directive to teachers regarding discipline in the classroom, committing to hiring more teaching assistants and school support staff to reduce the pressure on teachers in our schools, allowing teachers to have more monitoring time, introducing a detailed plan to reduce overcrowding in our schools. I request that the committee hold a meeting on this topic in September and the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development be called as a witness to update the committee on its progress in implementing these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA LeBlanc.
Just want to speak in support of that motion. I was going to make a similar motion. In the middle of the meeting, I felt very stressed out because there was so much to talk about, so much to listen, and of course, as the deputy said, that this is an ongoing process, and it would be really important for us to get an interim report, as it were, before the Auditor General's sort of normal 2-year check-in. So we support this motion.
MLA Taggart.
Difficult to, sorry, I didn't see the light wasn't on, so I'm not going to support it. I just, there was a whole range, I don't have them right in front of me, but a whole range of recommendations that need to be passed, and for us to recommend or pass a motion that says that they should be passed in the next 2.5 months, it doesn't really give anybody any time to do any due diligence and make sure that they, there's no unintended consequences, those sort of things. So I think I don't know why we're suddenly wanting, I mean, I know why, it's a critical issue, but I don't think we want to get ahead of ourselves. I really believe that we want to give the department ample time to do what needs to be done. This crisis wasn't created in 2.5 months, and for us to to suggest that it should be, the code of conduct should be put forward, and all the other different recommendations of the Auditor General be put in place in 2.5 months is just not reasonable. And secondly, with respect to a next meeting, it's certainly a very critical topic, but I think it should go to agenda setting like everything else. Thank you.
There's any further discussion on MLA Barkhouse?
Well, the AG is here, and I would like to ask her what the plans are for her follow-ups as well.
Thank you. And would the AG approach this mic here, and she can respond to MLA Barkhouse?
It works, what we discussed.
So our typical follow-up process will be in 2 years' time, unless the committee recommends or requests a faster follow-up timeline. However, I think the motion, from what I understood, was an update, not an expectation that all of the recommendations would be implemented by fall.
MLA Barkhouse.
So maybe I could get MLA Clark to reread that, because I heard differently, but...
You have 2 minutes to do so.
Just read the motion.
Just read the motion.
Sure. I move this committee requests Department of Education work to implement the recommendations from this report before the next school year, including providing clear directives to teachers regarding discipline in the classroom, committing to hiring more teaching assistants and school support staff to reduce the pressure on teachers in our schools, allowing teachers to have more monitoring time, introducing a detailed plan to reduce overcrowding in our schools. And to echo the AG's point, I'm not suggesting that all of those things, and to respond to Emily Taggart, I'm not suggesting that all of those things would be done in September. But I think we heard today that there's certainly an appetite from the department to move as quickly as possible. So I think that's a reasonable question. I'd like to put the motion forward to a vote.
Thank you. I'll call, seeing nothing further, MLA Young.
I apologize, Madam Chair. It's much more easier when you have a written copy that's presented in front of you. I misunderstood the first part of that motion. Are you asking that the public accounts direct the Department of Education to do these changes for September, or was the request that you were looking at to get the Department of Education to actually come back here and appear as a witness, like would schedule perhaps a time? Could you just clarify your comments, please?
Yeah.
MLA Clark?
The latter. Yeah. So
I understand it's a check-in with the
correct.
committee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct. Not a, this has to be
It's
done
11
by
o'clock.
September.
Do you wish to go for a little bit longer? Okay. She said I could.
You can ask
I can ask you because it's the committee.
if you want to extend.
Yes. Well, seeing, I guess, and we'll just say, meeting is adjourned.